Hello, everybody. My name is Brendan Dowling, and this is day 2 on Zoom of the Center for East Asian Studies' pedagogy workshop. I'm going to do a brief introduction to hip-hop pedagogy, and then we will turn it over to Dr. Lauren Kelly, who will discuss hip-hop pedagogy in detail and lead us through some great activities. So let's get started. So for me, hip-hop pedagogy is something that's powerful, systematic, and supportive. Powerful as being empowering, especially to Black students, but also as hip-hop as a genre in the US and as in the world is probably the biggest, most known genre, and has influenced and is essentially pop culture, and pop culture is everywhere. So in that sense, in regards to hip hop music being used in the classroom, it's really something that could be anywhere, used anywhere. But I think that it's important to understand where hip hop pedagogy came from, and also to understand that it's also systematic. And what I mean here by systematic is that it's not just putting on a song at the beginning of class before class starts, and then really making no further connection for the rest of the class. What I mean by systematic here is that it's something from beginning to end. And so it's not only using methods that fuse hip hop in the classroom for warm-up activities, but also for discussions, and also for test preparation, and for many things. So it's something that it can be used across the entire curriculum, and it's also very supportive of people in the classroom, and creates community, and is something which is also very in a way challenges or can replace learning that's traditionally been used, the traditional curriculum in classrooms that's been used for years, that's for a specific group. And it's hip hop pedagogy for me is important in connecting myself with my students, whether it's through incorporating some element like dance into the classroom for more hands-on or moving around students, or if it's focusing on and connecting with students who may be more quiet, and having them write poetry or write rhymes that are influenced by their favorite MCs, or creating platforms to perform those rhymes, especially with students who are more talkative students in class. And so there's really a sense of community in the classroom that can be as a result of using hip hop pedagogy, and it can connect everybody to the subject being taught. And it's something which I've used in the Chinese language classroom. So I've adapted hip hop pedagogy in elementary and intermediate level Chinese language classrooms here at UW. And I've had a lot of great responses from students, not only exposing them to hip hop and knowledge and music and dance, but also exposing them to Chinese hip hop and having content discussions and just talking about hip hop and its connection to China and the United States. And these are just a few activities, just a couple worksheets, handout worksheets. You can see the lines here in these pictures here are fill in the blanks. So this was testing students' target vocabulary that they were learning for the day. And these are lyrics that I took from a database that I had of Chinese hip hop artists. And so what I did here was just search on my own time to find vocabulary and grammar that we are learning in the language classroom in my lyrics corpus of the Chinese hip hop artists that I had, and then bringing those lyrics into the classroom, making them into an activity, and then also introducing them to the music, to the video, and then also having the discussion about kind of their perspective and their take on what they saw and what they heard. And at the same time, they were able to write here, write in Chinese. They were listening, so they were focusing on their listening as well. They're reading as well, and they're spoken if they wanted to go ahead and recite that. So this is just one activity of many activities that I had in the classroom, where I used lyrics to help students to listen, speak, read, and write in Chinese. And I'm just going to keep it brief there, and that's another worksheet, but we'll be talking about a lot more in detail. I'll be discussing activities that I used, which I borrowed from hip hop pedagogy and applied in the Chinese classroom, Chinese language classroom, in person on Saturday. So that's my quick, brief introduction. And now it's on to session 2. So session 2 is going to be led by Dr. Lauren Lay Kelly, who is a passionate educator and scholar. She's associate professor of urban social justice, teacher education, and co-editor of Bloomsbury Handbook of Hip Hop Pedagogy. She has been published in many large journals and books across the world, and has traveled to China and traveled to different places, bringing her research, which explores how adolescents develop critical literacy, consciousness, and agency through hip-hop pedagogy, amongst many other things. And she has received national acclaim, including the 2022 Nasser Jones Fellowship at the Hutchins Center for African and African-American Research at Harvard University, the 2022 NAED Spencer Postdoctoral Fellowship, the 2021 Save the Kids Hip Hop Activism Scholar Activist of the Year Award, and many, many more. And she is here to spread a lot of knowledge and a lot of great activities to everybody. And so like yesterday, I would say, please be prepared to take lots of notes, because there is going to be a lot of knowledge dropped here today in her session. And with that, I will introduce Professor Dr. Lauren Lay Kelly to take the stage, and I will stop sharing here.
Hi, everyone. We'll take like a second to see each other's faces in large before we do more screen sharing. Good morning or good afternoon or good evening. I know folks are sort of tuning in from different parts of the world at this moment, which is exciting, and how great that we have this technology that we can do that. So I don't know if that's if it's evident, but I am a New Yorker, and so not to stereotype us, but I talk really fast. It's not going to change. I've been like that as a teacher in K-12 classrooms. I did that, and so at any point, if you need me to slow down, feel free to just say that. You can throw it in the chat, although I may or may not see that, but you can just, put your mic on and say, like, can you go back to that, or say that one more time, or please slow down, and I'm happy to do so. Part of it, it's the New York in me, but it's also, I get really excited about this work. I love teaching, I love pedagogy, I love curriculum, I love lesson planning, and so yeah, I just get real geeked out. Okay, so let's dig into it. There's so much to discuss today. So yes, once again, Lauren Lay Kelly. I am, as of this coming Saturday, I believe that's July 1st, officially Associate Professor of Urban Social Justice Teacher Education at Rutgers University, which is in New Brunswick, New Jersey. And a brief, just to sort of understand how I locate myself in this work and my research and my teaching. And so my background is in teaching high school English, although I did begin my teaching career teaching English as a second additional language in Japan, in Yokohama specifically. And so in my teaching, in my research, my focus has always really been on young people's critical development, specifically thinking about how they develop critical consciousness, which is one's awareness of the social, political, cultural factors that impact their lives, thinking about young people's imaginings and co-construction of their social world and their futures, of course, hip-hop education. And I've been doing for about 5 years now, some organizing work with young people. And so I work with adolescents, specifically high school and undergraduate students, on co-organizing a hip hop youth conference. And so that's taken place. We started out at Teachers College, Columbia, and then migrated to Rutgers. We were online, of course, for 2 years during the pandemic. But this is work that's really, and actually this t-shirt I'm wearing is from the conference. It was designed by one of the young people, the Hip Hop Youth Research and Activism Conference. And it's a space where young people are letting us know what they care about. right? Not only what they want to be taught, but how they want to be taught. And they do that by designing workshops that are youth-led, that are for young people, although adults are always welcome to participate and to attend, to really ground their own identities and again, their futures in pedagogy. And so I know there was a question that we'll get to later on that someone asked around, pedagogies that are youth engaged. And I've been learning a lot about that particular question in the past few years in working with young people. And so a quick warm up, we're going to utilize our chat here, and please drop, I know this is easier for some than others, you will all be okay, it is not a test, your favorite hip hop song. If you could do the title and artist, that would be preferred, because there are some titles that multiple artists have. Don't worry about the why, we'll get to that. Have your why and know your why, but you don't need to write that whole essay right now, just your favorite hip hop artist in the chat. Also your name in the chat, if the name that we see come up for you is not the name that you prefer or go by. And then I will ask some folks in a moment to share their why with us, but no need to do that in the chat. So we'll take a moment here. Favorite hip hop song, title and artist. And as you're doing that, I will play my favorite hip hop song for you all, some inspirational music. Again, it's not a test. Don't think too hard on it. It's fine if your answer is different tomorrow and next week, just whatever comes to mind first. Hi, everyone. You can continue to share if you haven't had a chance to do so yet. But we're going to start to hear some of the whys of this music. Lori Fields, do you mind if we start with you? Queen Latifah, UNITY. I know my reason I love that song. What is your why?
I think in being a citizen who is not part of the majority, we're such a divided nation politically and socially, that appeals to me, and what it is that I try to get across to my students as being one, and also personally. So that's what it means to me. I like that one. Plus, I'm old. I don't know a lot of young MC hip hop stuff. So
you know what you need to know.
I know what I need to know.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Michael, Run DMC.
I'm kind of old too. So, I for me, it was a time where I was still kind of learning English as a new American, and I'm in high school and I'm going to Yo MTV Raps and dancing with Run DMC. And, I didn't even really get all the words yet, but I just knew I loved it. So it kind of takes me back to my youth. What can I say? But as for modern stuff, I'm guessing Black Alicious.
I love all of that. Thank you for sharing that, Michael. Quick disruption, folks, because it's happened twice already. There seems to be this connotation around old, that it's somehow not good or not relevant for this or not appropriate. And I think we should have a reframe, because we also know that attached to age is maturity and wisdom and experience and storytelling. And so these are all good things, right? We need this. We need folks to have stories. We need folks to have experience and wisdom. And thank you for sharing it. And we're going to reframe, right? By old, we mean wise, and helpful, and bringing to this community a wealth and a breadth of experience. Let's do one more. MC Hot Dog. There were a couple MC Hot Dogs. Could one person share with us your why?
I could share. So I was really uncertain what to say, and I kind of cheated because I saw somebody else write MC Hot Dog. I'm not super knowledgeable, but I think what really appealed to me is that it was in another language. So it's kind of like another entry point into new culture. And I was pretty new in Taiwan at the time when I first heard his music.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. And again, everyone, it's not a test. So there is literally no right answer. Your favorite hip hop song could be the one that you know, or the one whose title you remember, or the one you heard in the supermarket yesterday, right? Really no right answers here. And we'll talk in a moment about sort of this expansive notion of hip hop and what it is. So just give me a moment while I reshare. There we go. So why this activity? This is something I've done several times in the classroom, specifically in the secondary classroom, but really in any space where there are people who've had any contact with the world. What I love about hip hop is that at this point, and as we sort of already kind of explored yesterday, it is worldwide, right? It is global. It is hard to be a person who's sort of over the age of 10 who lives, you know, anywhere where there's some access to media or technology and not know about hip hop. Right, whether or not it's your cup of tea is a different thing, but it's hard to find someone who hasn't heard, you know, of Cardi B or hasn't heard of Jay-Z, although some people just know him as Beyonce's husband, which is fascinating. And so what's amazing about an activity like this is that you start to unearth, especially in the whys, right, people's very specific connection, right? So my mom is not someone who listens to hip hop, right? She's from Jamaica. She grew up on like roots reggae music and dance hall and lovers rock. But she knows some artists, right? And her reason for why will be really specific, right? Probably a tape that my brother played over and over in like the late 80s. And so I find that it's a really useful activity for getting to know your students, right? And in a more profound way than sort of the typical first day of school, like share your name and I don't know, something that you like, right? Share something about yourself, right? Which can feel really intimidating. And it's so open that people, especially students, will kind of freeze up and not know what to share. So it gives them an opportunity, right, to have something really specific. It doesn't have to be a favorite hip hop song. It could be something else. Excuse all the birds that are outside this window. But there's something about really specifying, even if you say your favorite country song, right? Folks will have a reason why they know that one country song, even if they don't listen to country music. And that invites a lot of really interesting stories. It also helps you as a teacher to learn about your students' popular media engagement, right? So if you find a lot of students, you know, mentioned a Drake song, or a lot of students mentioned songs from the 90s, that tells you something about them, right? It tells you something about their backgrounds, that they're not necessarily interested in quote unquote modern music, right? Or trendy music, or what everyone else is doing, right? That there's something about them that is connected to this previous generation. It also allows for you to hear more specific and profound stories about your students, right? So what we sometimes do in our subject areas, if we do invite opportunities for students to share themselves, we'll make it really academically focused, right? We'll say like, share, you know, your name and your favorite book, right? Or your favorite book you read last year in class, or your favorite time period, right? It's something that's so specific to the subject we teach. What would it look like to invite something that isn't necessarily stuck to the subject area that we're teaching, right? Something that allows for them to see that we actually care about their lives outside of the classroom, right? We care about what they're engaging with. We want to know what they're engaging with. And of course, for the ELA people in the room, it's always an opportunity to do a review. You can review themes, literary devices, you can look at literary elements. I've done this activity where it's a homework assignment and students will post to our sort of webpage for the class a quote from their favorite song. So it's not only the song, but there's also a quote that reflects either a literary device or element. Sometimes I have them find a theme in the song, and what that allows for them to do is go back into the music that they're already connected to, right? That they're passionate about, that's important to them, but go into it with a different lens, right? Have you ever considered the theme or the thesis of your favorite song? And that might allow for students to even look at their own cultures, right? Or their own music or media engagement through a new lens. And that also helps in the classroom, right? Because now they're looking at what is a theme or what is a thesis through a different lens. And of course, it decenters what we see as sort of the traditional historical dominant curriculum, right? It lets students know, yes, we have textbooks, and yes, there's tests, and also the curriculum is more than that, right? You are the curriculum, your culture is the curriculum, your community is the curriculum. And doing something like this early in the year lets them know that, right? It really centers them, and they can say, oh, this is a teacher I can talk to about music. This is a teacher, I had a student one year that loved talking about Doctor Who, and I'd never watched it, but I started, right? So that we can engage in our conversation sort of in the hallways after class. And I could say, I didn't really understand what was going on in this episode, and he could explain it to me. And so it also gives them an opportunity to be the expert. So it's not always you as the teacher who's the expert all the time, which for students, right, when that's 7 hours a day, every single day for like 15 years, that could be exhausting, right? What is it like to feel like you also have expertise and your teacher wants to hear it? And so, as you heard, my favorite hip hop song is Common Resurrection. It's been my favorite hip hop song since I was, I don't know, an early adolescent. If aliens came to this universe and they were like, I heard about this thing that you call hip hop, I don't know what it is, explain it to me, I would just play this song because I feel like it's all the things. Like you hear the scratching, there's no hook. So it really just is like, it's rap and it's DJing. And then this rhyme scheme, y'all. I'm sharing my screen still. You can see this. I stagger in the gathering, possessed by a pattern, and that be scattering. over the globe will my vocals be traveling? I mean, it's just, I'm nestling when it's crunch time. It's got puns and assonance and alliteration and poetry and rhyme scheme. And it's just a great song. And so some useful terminology as we sort of start to dig into these conversations around hip hop pedagogy and hip hop literacy. Hip hop culture, of course, is more than just the music, right? It goes beyond rap. That's one of multiple elements of hip hop culture. So it's also language. It's also fashion. It's dance. Hip hop culture is even values, right? Values about your community, right? About oneself, about knowledge attainment, right? About uplift that can be reflected in the music, right? But hip hop music and hip hop are not one and the same, right? One is a larger umbrella, hip hop culture, and then the music is one facet of it. Hip hop practice is something I define as any action or structure that's rooted in hip hop culture, right? So a cipher, people are standing in a circle and they could be freestyling in that circle. They could be rapping in that circle. They could be talking in that circle. They could be dancing in that circle. They could be miming things, right, in that circle, but that's still a cipher. And that's something that draws from, that comes out of hip hop culture. Sampling, right? Something that producers do, that DJs do, where they take pieces, right, of an existing text and then make a new text out of it. And there's so many different ways that we sample. As teachers, we sample all the time. That's a hip hop practice, right? Tagging, right? Which is a part of graffiti culture. And of course, hip hop music, yes, it's rap, but it's also more expansive than rap, right? It is R&B, it is reggae. Neo is not hip hop. Mary J. Blige is not hip hop, right? All of this larger sort of community goes beyond rap music in and of itself. And hip hop text is, again, in my definition, you can have your own, anything that can be read, right? Anything of this culture, of this media that can be read. And so, yes, that's lyrics. It could also be a video, right? We can sort of read a music video. And especially, I don't know if you all have tried this, especially with students, if you watch a music video, especially like a really popular one on mute, you see very different things from when you're sort of singing along with the lyrics at the same time. And so that's a really interesting thing to do in the classroom, is look at one hip hop text, right? One song / video, as though it was, you know, a piece of literature or a text that you're studying in your classroom, where you look at it multiple times, right? So if you're reading a speech by JFK in your classroom, you're probably not going to read it once, or at least in our classroom, we would read it multiple times, and you annotate, then you ask questions, and you go back with more information and you discuss it. What would it look like to take a music video? And maybe first you watch it and listen to it. Then you watch it on mute. What stands out to you, right? Then you just listen to it without watching the video. What stands out to you? And so there's a lot of dialogue and a lot of critical conversation that can come from analyzing different forms of hip hop text, again, moving beyond the lyrics and of themselves. And of course, hip hop identities, any way in which someone engages with hip hop. That doesn't necessarily mean that they are an MC. It doesn't mean they even listen to hip hop music, right? But they might engage with the practice, right? With the culture, the community, the language, even fashion. And so the 4 elements of hip hop, as we know, are, you know, MCing or rapping, DJing. You could also say turntablism, breaking, b-boying, b-girling, etc., and graffiti. And this is a quick test. Can someone unmute for us and share the 5th element? I know someone knows. I will wait patiently. So there's one more, and you can't see it. What is the 5th element? Many people would say the most important of hip hop culture.
Is it like spontaneous rapping?
I love that. Freestyling would be a part of MCing. Mm-hmm.
Fashion?
Well, according to the Universal Explanation, yes. They have, I think, 9 elements. That includes fashion, entrepreneurship, language, etc. But sort of the core basic 5 includes one more that you all engage with every time you're in the classroom. I love this. So the 5th element is knowledge. And what's so amazing to me about, and the reason we talk about it, is that it's the one that people don't really talk about, right? Because you can't see it, you certainly can't sell it, you can't commodify it. But that's really where hip hop began, right? It was about knowledge, and knowledge in multiple forms, right? So knowledge of self is what people most often refer to when they're talking about the 5th element, right? Knowing oneself, understanding oneself. You do that through writing, right? You do that through dance. You do it through these artistic expressions, right? That it's a way of getting to know who this person is, but not as the end, right? You have to understand yourself, know your positionality in the world, love yourself in order to be able to participate in your communities, right? To contribute to your communities. But also from an even more sort of concrete sense, you have to have certain types of knowledge to do any of these elements, right? You can't be a graffiti artist and you're not good at art. It just doesn't work. I mean, you could try, but no one's coming to your pieces. I don't know if you can finish a whole mural. You can't rap and you don't know words, right? And you can't be a good rapper and not know a lot of words and really complicated ones, right? You don't get an M&M without knowledge. You can't just wake up and be a great MC. You have to actually study language, right? You have to know things in order to have puns, in order to have allusions and references. And of course, to be a DJ, like that's all technology, right? The fact that Kool Herc was able to invent this idea of taking two record players and putting them together to only play the breakbeat, in essence, creating a whole new song, like all of that is knowledge. So you don't get hip hop at all without having very technical forms of knowledge around language and technology and art, and even spatial dimensions, right? And so if you've ever seen a b-boy dance, right, you don't get that without understanding the body, right? You have to understand kinesthetics. You have to understand your body to not be hurt, and then to figure out how to do this in a way that impresses people, right? And so the fifth element, knowledge or knowledge of self. Patricia Hill Collins said that constructed knowledge of self emerges from the struggle to replace controlling images with self-defined knowledge deemed personally important, usually knowledge essential to survival, right? So in essence, she's saying this is not just like this flippant, if you have time, right? She said, you have to know yourself, right? Especially for communities of color, especially for marginalized communities, because if you don't, someone else is going to make something up and it's going to be harmful to you, right? So it is essential to your survival that you know yourself, that you know your community, that you have this awareness, right? That you ground yourself in that. And so to bring you to a brief background of how we get here, as I mentioned, I started out teaching English in Japan, moved back to New York and taught 9th grade English in Queens, New York. I think we have a couple of Queens folks in the room. And what happened was, because my own background, you know, as a young person, as a person in the world, was very much connected to music, right? So I grew up listening to the radio, making mixtapes. I became a DJ in college, mostly because I didn't like what the DJs were playing. And I was like, there's gotta be a way to play fun music that isn't like homophobic and oppressive and misogynistic, et cetera. And to some extent, even capitalistic. And so I was always engaging with music, right? Even when I was teaching in Japan, I was playing music in the classroom all the time, and we'd sort of analyze the lyrics or we'd dance around. And so I just sort of naturally brought music into my classroom without knowing this was a thing. I'd never heard of hip hop pedagogy. I didn't know about hip hop education. I just knew that I was really interested in music, and it was a way that I connected to the world and to myself. So I brought it into my classroom. I would play music as the students came in, and we'd have conversations about it. They would sort of dance if they had some time before we started our studies, our lesson. And then I started to incorporate music into the lessons, right? We'd talk about, you know, themes, metaphors, rhyme scheme, right? Even writing skills through the lens of music. And it wasn't always rap, right? Sometimes it could be Bollywood music. It could be jazz, folk, R&B. But the idea was that for my students, it was new for them, right? This wasn't normal. They weren't accustomed to teachers bringing music to the classroom, and especially music that they knew or familiar with. And something really amazing started to happen, where I noticed, because of the age that I was and the age my students were, some of the things that I would play would be like their older siblings or their parents' music. So I remember one lesson, we were looking at TLC's Waterfalls to examine extended metaphor, right? Like, what is the waterfall? You can't chase one. They're kind of like static. So what does this mean? I remember the next day, one of my students came in, he was like, my mom was playing Waterfalls. And I was like, that's not crazy. It's an amazing song. Like, of course she was playing it. But it was a way that we were able to connect in the classroom, not only me with my students, but they were connecting to their own families, right, into their own culture. So it became this really cyclical process of building connections in this academic space, but that was rooted in culture and that was rooted in media. And over time, I became more interested in not just using, and Brendan mentioned this earlier, hip hop music as a way to just sort of bridge those academic skills, right? Like Shakespeare had rhymes, so did Tupac. I was really interested in what messages students were receiving from these texts, right? What were they hearing when they heard Lil Wayne? When they heard Nicki Minaj, right? How did it impact their understanding of themselves, right? Their knowledge of self, their understanding of the world. And so I started to bring in these texts, right, into the classroom to engage in critical dialogue in the same way that you would with sort of a more traditional academic text. But it was way more engaging, right? Because they're like, oh, this is like, I listen to this all the time. I know that you don't even need to hand me the lyrics. I know the lyrics, right? But they hadn't taken these critical lenses to these texts before, right? What does it look like to read Neo's, I think it's Neo, or is it Omarion, Let Me Love You, through a feminist lens, right? What does it mean for someone to say, let me love you until you can love yourself, right? And so we would look at these texts in ways that were new, familiar texts, right? But through new or unfamiliar lenses, in order for the students to gain a better understanding of what they were consuming when they were consuming this music. And for me, I was able to better understand my students, right? There was one lesson where it wasn't a lesson. My students made me listen to the birthday song. I don't know if you'll remember this, 2 Chainz and Kanye West. I won't sing it because it's like super inappropriate and we're being recorded. I don't know if that's judgment. It's explicit and we're being recorded. But they made me listen to the song. And one of the first things I said, it's sort of very like, the women are very sexualized in the video. The song is, very sexualized. And I said, why? What is your why? Why do you all love this song? The conversation we had afterwards completely changed how I understood my students, because all I saw was the hypersexualization of women, in particular women of color in this video. And I was like, why are you all okay with this? But in the conversation, when I said, what is appealing to you about this video? They started with, oh, well, we can relate to it. And I was like, this is what your life looks like? Like you have this house with like all of these half-naked women just like roaming around being these like visual objects, and they're never participating. You don't see their faces, you just see their bodies. And they're like, no, it's not that. But if I wanted to have that, it would be nice to know that I could. So in this conversation, as we're unraveling, right, what I'm seeing as like blatant misogyny, they were like, no, it's about power, right? As young people, and especially as youth of color, they felt like they didn't have power. They didn't have access to things. So what they were gravitating towards in this video and this song was the idea of the power that 2 Chainz and Kanye West exuded, not the objectification of the woman, right? So that was a turning point for me in understanding the role of critical hip hop literacy in the classroom, right? Is that it's not just students learning, but it's also teachers learning about their students and gaining expansive perspectives on what they value, right? And what they see and how they interpret things way differently than we do. So this idea of critical literacy, for those who are unfamiliar, it's that you're reading the word and the world, right? That you're looking to text as a way of understanding the world that you're in, not just for sort of reading comprehension, and also creating text to speak back to that, right? To challenge that. So combining that notion with Louise Rosenblatt's transactional theory, right? The idea that meaning isn't just like sitting in a text, right? And it's not the same for everyone, but meaning is actually co-constructed. Right. She argued that it was a co-construction between the reader and the text. And I would argue it's the readers and each other and the text, right? That I might read something and get something very different. And then I'm in conversation with Brian and I'm like, oh, I didn't see that at all, right? And that we're having these transactions to co-construct knowledge all of the time, right? And of course, critical media pedagogy, which is doing that through media text and not just sort of books or traditional poems. And so critical hip hop literacy is the idea that you're bringing hip hop texts. And again, that could be a video, it could be an article, right? Narratives of artists into the classroom for the purpose of engaging in critical dialogue about the societal issues that are reflected in these texts, right? So again, going beyond, Drake has rhymes or there's a pun here, point out the literary devices, but to really think about what is happening in these songs, what ideas, what values are reflected, how are you connecting to those ideas? So to give you some examples, I was teaching a college level hip hop literature course. I don't know if you all remember this scandal when these professors put this tweet out right before spring break. And it was, this idea that they are, it's a school of preaching. So instead of like Notorious B.I.G., it was Notorious S.O.P., School of Preaching. Cool. So this came out, and of course, the scandal was like, how can they do this? This is cultural appropriation, da, 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 da. And other people were like, it's fine, like they're just having fun. And so I brought it into the classroom and I asked my students, what are you seeing here, right? What are we thinking? And these are some of the notes. And if you notice, they all sort of came through with different perspectives, right? Some people said like, they're just having fun, right? And they're embracing this culture. And shouldn't we be glad that hip hop culture is being embraced in this way? And other folks were like, but if I dressed like that, I'd be seen as a criminal, right? I'd be seen as a threat. And so it's not really fair they get to do this, right? And benefit from the culture and not actually be subject to the ways in which like we are harmed by the bodies that we're in, right? At one point we read Trisha Rose's, we took excerpts from Trisha Rose's The Hip Hop Wars and just sort of moved around the room to engage in dialogue, in writing with some of the quotes and the ideas from the text, right? And again, another way to think about that co-construction of knowledge, it doesn't always have to be out loud, right? There are ways that we can write and have more time to sort of think and respond to each other that isn't like a debate. Because that's the thing that happens when you're teaching with hip hop in the classroom. There's always a debate. There's always, who's the greatest, who's your top 5, that person's terrible, that's not even real rap, etc. So thinking about the multiple ways to engage in that. And then this last example before we move into our activity, and again, slow me down if this is It's a lot. It's a lot to pack into 90 minutes. At one point in a high school hip hop literature classroom I was teaching, we were reading Drake's song Crew Love. I don't know if you all remember the song. But there's a line where he says, I guess we'll never know what Harvard gets us, but seeing my family have it all took the place for the desire for diplomas on the wall. And so we stopped on that line. And I said, and I'm teacher in this dialogue. And we engaged in this conversation about that line in particular, right? Which is an amazing thing you could do with critical hip hop literacies. You don't have to read the entire text and talk about the entire text. You can focus on particular pieces of it, right? Especially the ones that are really connected to your students. So I stopped here. We had this dialogue, and I will need 3 volunteers, if you don't mind, to read the students' roles. I'll be teacher, but if we could have someone read Jake and JC and Sonia, and you can just throw a hand up and say like, I'll do that. Can we have a Jake? It's just a couple lines. I don't see a hand. Thank you so much, Brian. And then can we have a JC? JC only speaks once.
Perfect for me.
Thank you. And the Sonia.
I'll do Sonia.
Thank you, Lori. All right, so I pointed to this line. I think we had the lyrics projected in the front of the room, so we're all looking at it at the same time. And I said, we'll never know what Harvard gets us. What is he saying?
We never know where we could go if we had an education.
Why won't he ever know where it will get him?
Because he didn't go there.
That's a very JC thing to say. He's like, because he didn't go there. I don't know why is this a question. And I said, but seeing my family have it all took the place of that desire for diplomas on the wall.
He had to get his money while he could make it.
Yeah, I feel that way too. It's a waste.
So why is he okay with not having a college education?
He's rich anyway. Why does he need an education?
Which means, what's the priority here?
Money.
The only reason people go to college is to get a job to make money.
And then Sonia said,
Oh, I don't see Sonia's part.
oh, all good. It's probably cut off here. Exactly. So what was amazing to me about this conversation, I didn't realize that my students viewed college only as a means to make money. When I think about it, I guess it seems like, how did I not know that? Because we live in this capitalist society and economy. But that was really surprising to me, right? That they only saw college as a means to the bag. And if you already had the bag, then why would you need college? And I was like, wait, but what about learning? I thought that, college education was about learning. And for them, it was just, their understanding of it from either what they've been taught, what they heard, how they'd experienced life, was that it was just about getting the job to get to the money. And so if you didn't need it to get the job, or if you didn't need to get the money, then there's no point, right? And then and then we had multiple days where I was like, we got to talk about this. Like, what even is education? But that's just one example, right, of the conversations that can happen when you dig into, and they'd not had this conversation before. They'd listened to the song a billion times, right, like it or not, because it'd be on, right, in the supermarket, in someone's car, right, on the radio. But they hadn't had this conversation, right, around how they were receiving ideas about learning and education. And so that's one example of how critical hip hop literacy can lead to these really expansive conversations in the classroom. So critical hip hop pedagogy is, of course, about understanding for teachers, right? Understanding the ethos, the values, even the sensibilities of historically marginalized students broadly, but especially those whose cultures have sort of been left out of the classroom. And it's also about responding to the needs and identities of students through pedagogical practices, right? Through the culture that you build in the classroom. But even for those classrooms, if you're not teaching students who come from historically marginalized backgrounds or oppressed communities, you're still exposing students to the histories and the narratives and the cultures and even the contributions, right? Which is also something that's left out a lot, of communities that have been historically marginalized, right? Or excluded from classroom discourse, from classroom curriculum. And so this is not, I know there's this like myth that hip hop education is like only for urban areas. It's only for students of color. It's only for students from like economically disadvantaged families. It's really for everyone, but how you engage with hip hop pedagogy will shift, right? It should look different depending on what classroom you're in, depending on what your students look like, depending on their backgrounds, right? And so that's really, I would say, the biggest challenge of doing that work is figuring out what are the ways in which hip hop pedagogy can be empowering for the students in my classroom, depending on their backgrounds. And then to sort of conclude our Hip Hop Pedagogy 101, here's some useful resources if you just want to learn more about hip hop culture. These documentaries on the left, a lot of them are on Netflix. These books on the right, especially Jeff Chang's Can't Stop, Won't Stop. I love that book. For those of you who are history people, it is like an American history textbook, but through the lens of hip hop culture, right? So you're reading about like what's happening politically, what's happening economically, what's happening socioculturally, but it's through the lens of these communities whose stories are never told in the traditional textbooks. Love that book. And they also recently made, last year they came out with a YA version. So they made this book, which is kind of dense. It took me, I think, like 3 months to read it because there's a lot happening. You have to like pause and reflect every couple of chapters, but they made a version for young people that has like more photos and pictures and sort of simplifies things a little bit. And then the Bloomsbury Handbook of Hip Hop Pedagogy is currently available for pre-order, but it's only available in hardcover. So this is the kind of thing you want your school libraries to buy. I wouldn't encourage you to buy this right now until it comes out in paperback. That's edited by Darren Graves, who's at Simmons University, and me. And speaking of shameless plugs, y'all, my book is about to drop July 11th. It is available for pre-order. If you hold your phone's camera up to this, what are these called? QR code, it'll bring you to the webpage where if you use this code, you can get a 20% discount. And this book is really specifically about how we do this work in the classroom, right? So it moves beyond the theory of the why or for whom, and it talks about, what you do on Monday, what you do on Tuesday, what does a lesson look like? It gives sample lessons and worksheets and even sample texts that one can use, keeping in mind that depending on where you're teaching, the text should be different, right? So if you're teaching in New York, you'll use different artists than maybe if you're teaching in the West Coast or the Midwest. So you just want to be mindful of molding it for your own classroom. So I'll leave this here for 10 more seconds if you need to take any photos. Cool. And then I will stop for a moment here and pause for questions, ideas.
What was the 20% off discount code again? That went really fast.
Sure, it is EFL02.
02. Thank you.
Questions?
I've got a question. Is it possible to get a copy? I don't know of in an ideal world, that your PowerPoint or just some other information or handouts, because I'm taking notes, but it's hard to catch all the wonderful stuff.
Yes, I'm putting the slides in the chat right now.
Great, thank you.
Yes, I appreciate that. And there's just so much, y'all, to pack in. And then Brendan, I know you wanted to, I believe, stop recording before we get into our activity, which we'll do in a moment. So I want to give you a chance to do that, or for any other questions before we experiment with this together.